Chorale is launching a new interactive event. It's called Morning Coffee and Maestros.
It's your chance to grab a cup of coffee and join in the conversation with myself, Joseph Calkins,
And me, Jamal Sirakoki. We'll be discussing important topics about music, the arts, culture, and our world.
and you can join in the conversation as well. Each episode will answer your question about the morning's topic. So, grab a cup of Joe
And Jamal,
and join us and see what happens when you put two maestros in the same room together.
it could be fun.
Could be dangerous.
You're probably right.
What could possibly go wrong? Join us for Morning Coffee
And Maestros.
Hello and welcome to Morning Coffee.
And Maestros.
In today's episode, we'll be revealing our top 10 pandemic playlist. Since we all have a bit more time than usual, we thought it'd be fun to create a top 10 list of the most influential choral and orchestral works ever.
And we would like for you to join in the conversation. You can join in on Facebook and YouTube. Using the live chat function, you can ask questions, make comments, and just be a part of the discussion. Let us know what you are listening to, maybe what your favorite works are, and feel free to ask us questions that we'll answer during today's broadcast.
And for this episode, Jamal and I have created our top 10 list along with recommended recordings or YouTube videos of these great masterpieces. You can click the link in the description below the video if you're on YouTube, and on Facebook, if you check the comments page, you can see the link. And if you click it, you'll be able to download a document with all the pieces we'll be discussing and all the links to hear these great works.
We've also created a list of 6 of our favorite off the beaten path pieces that we love and think you will enjoy. They range from Baroque to contemporary and also include, I'm sorry, let me fix my mic. This is rather annoying to the listeners, I'm sure.
It's very scratchy.
I'm sorry, everybody. There we go. Is this
don't
better?
move, just don't
All right.
Perfect.
We've created this list of 6 of our favorite off the beaten path pieces that we think that you will enjoy as much as we do. They range from Baroque to contemporary and also include our favorite performances of them. I hope, and we both hope, you'll take some time during this pandemic to listen to some of your favorite compositions, and maybe you'll even find a new favorite of your own.
That's true. So we thought this was going to be really easy to do. So on a scale of 1 to 10, Jamal, how hard was this?
I don't think it fits on the scale. I think it supersedes the scale of how difficult this was.
I think it's just because we had all of music to choose from, and we had to choose 10. And my list was great, and yours was terrible.
It was difficult to say the least, because you think of all of the most important choral orchestral works out there, and we didn't want to just come up with, the traditional list. I feel like we had to come up with a very, very unique list.
It'll be controversial, at least I hope it will be. And I'm concerned because today when I got here, this is morning coffee, and I have to say, I used to have like a little thing that you hold the cup of coffee, and so it broke on the way here, so I don't know if that's a bad omen for today's episode, but...
I think it is a omen for the arts. In order to create beauty, sometimes we have to break things.
It's right. It's out of brokenness that beauty comes. I like that.
Exactly.
Well, we created our own list of the top, of each of us created our own list of 10 to 15 influential works, and then we selected them in an NFL-style draft. So since we record Morning Coffee and Maestros here at Venice Presbyterian Church, where Jamal is the organist and the choir director, I thought he should have the home field advantage. So he selected his number 1, a terribly controversial pick. And then I selected my number 2, then Jamal 3, and so on. And when we finished, we had lots of great pieces, but we couldn't fit in everything. In fact, there's no Mozart. That's like a travesty.
It is a travesty.
There's no Mozart. There's no Haydn. There's no Brahms. It was quite a challenge.
But we did agree on one thing.
Absolutely.
Beethoven's Ninth and Handel's Messiah are in a category all by themselves. So today we are awarding the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Handel's Messiah with Lifetime Achievement Awards. They are so monumental and so well known that we decided not to include them in our top 10.
So what do we recommend for the recording of Beethoven 9?
So there's a version that you will find on that document of Riccardo Muti. And Riccardo Muti is, I don't know how to say this without being blasphemous, but Riccardo Muti to me is the god of conducting. He is certainly my favorite conductor. And so we have a traditional one by Riccardo Muti that everyone hears. It's kind of the standard of the performance practice of Beethoven's Ninth now. But we also selected a version by John Elliott Gardner, who is known for his period work. And this recording really encompasses what the orchestra would have looked like and sounded like during the time that Beethoven was premiering this work.
You know, and the tempi are much like Beethoven has. Beethoven gives you all of the tempi markings, and he really observes that. And I have to say, he's being very good, Jamal is, but usually when he says Riccardo Muti, he says it a little different. He goes, Riccardo Muti. And he uses his hand. It's like a divine sort of thing. So he's being confident, but how do you say it again?
Riccardo Muti.
See, there it is. See, that's when you know it's going to be good, if it's Muti.
So, Joe, what did we select for Handel's Messiah?
Oh, for Handel's Messiah, we did an interesting choice for that. We picked Trevor Pinnock in the English concert, which was one of my favorite kind of recordings. Again, the tempo is very lively. It's historically informed. It's really, I think, the one I always go to. I just love it. I love the tempi. The soloists are great. The orchestra playing is awesome. The articulation is great. And then we thought, well, since everybody knows Handel's Messiah, we assume most of you do, we thought we'd give you something a little different. And what you might not know is that Handel's Messiah was arranged by Mozart. And it was for one of these little salon things that they had in Vienna. And so in 1789, Mozart rearranged Handel's Messiah. He was a great lover of Handel, as we know. And so there's a couple differences. The big one is it's in German, because that was the language spoken at the salon. So it's written in German, and he almost reimagines the work in ways that he doesn't just arrange it, he sort of reimagines it in some way. Sometimes what's given to the chorus is given to the soloist and vice versa. And then what's really great, if you've heard Messiah a million times, well, here now we've added flutes and clarinets, two horns, trombones, so you have this totally different sound. And then, of course, the funniest part is when you get to the trumpet shall sound. Trumpet's played by what?
The French horn.
The French horn. So there you go. You don't expect that every day.
So today we'll start at number 10, and we're going to work our way toward number 1, which is a fantastic piece, as controversial as it is.
You're setting it up, I like
it. It is a fantastic piece. So, Joe, I believe that you have number 10.
I do have number 10. It was the easiest choice of all time, the Verdi Requiem. It's an epic piece. It has lots of dramatic moments. There's that famous double chorus Sanctus, which is just a bugger to learn, but it's really great. I think it has the most dramatic dies irae in all of the repertoire. It's very visceral for the chorus. It's really exciting. And then it has these moments where the bass drum has these huge dramatic strikes. And if I had the choice between playing the bass drum and the dies irae or conducting, I would play the bass drum. And the other part I love is I love the tuba mirum.
Yes.
Tuba mirum is a great moment because what Verdi does is he has offstage trumpets that come in, and it is the most it's like being at the Last Judgment right there on the precipice. I mean, it's so arresting and so interesting. But I have to say the reason I picked this was not just because I love the work, but it's really sentimental to me. The first time I got to see Robert Shaw work was for this workshop doing the Verdi Requiem. So I spent a week with him watching him put together Verdi Requiem and then do performances, and we got to touch the stage of Carnegie Hall.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing that was great is all the rehearsals were done where all of the Robert Shaw chorale recordings were made. So it was just being surrounded in this hallowed sort of chamber of all this great music, and then being in Carnegie Hall. I remember we were in Carnegie Hall and Shaw was in there. It was kind of early before the rehearsal, and James Levine came walking in with a big sandwich from Carnegie Deli, just dripping pastrami and everything through Carnegie Hall, but he could get away with it then. So, but it was a great experience, and I remember listening to the rehearsal. It was about 120, 140 singers, and I said to myself as a young conductor, this is the first time I've ever heard a choir sing absolutely together, every single syllable. And it really changed my life. And he became a wonderful mentor for me. And it just changed my whole philosophy about it, watching him prepare some of these great masterworks. And so, I think for me, I had to go with a sentimental choice of the Atlanta Symphony Chorus and Orchestra. It's probably a better recording, but not for me, because I hear that sound and I'm taken back to that place.
No, when I was in college, and I don't think to date I've told my mother the story because she'd probably be mad. But Riccardo Muti had just come to the Chicago Symphony while I was in college, and I was going to school in New York. And when I saw that he was doing Verdi's Requiem, I saved all my pennies, got on a plane, and came home to see him perform Verdi's Requiem with Chicago Symphony. And you talk about the big bass drum in the Dies Irae, and it was just so funny because the principal percussionist for Chicago Symphony is just this very tiny woman. And so just seeing her with the sheer force of beating that bass drum was just, it was funny, but it was amazing to see the sound that this little tiny woman could produce and getting the bass drum. But the Verdi Requiem is definitely very sentimental for me as well, just because it was like the only time in my life that I have gotten on a plane to travel to another state to see a conductor perform a work so monumental as the Verdi Requiem.
It's a great piece. I know Robert Shaw would tell the story of he did a lot of preparing for Toscanini, and they were doing he was in a rehearsal, and they were doing Verdi Requiem. They're at the Dies Irae, and he asked the percussionist, "Can you make any more sound?" And he said, "This is the most sound I can make, Maestro." And he says, "What if you stood on a chair? Could you make more sound then?" And jumped down to the bass drum. And he said, "I can't do it fast enough, Maestro." So it's but it's a great moment. So that's our 10. So what did you choose for the number 9?
For number 9, I went to another Requiem, and that is the Fauré Requiem. And I think we could all agree that the Fauré Requiem is probably one of the most important requiems and sung requiems written. Fauré spent most of his career as a church musician, and the Fauré Requiem really is the only large-scale sacred work that he wrote. In fact, he's only written a handful of sacred repertoire. One of the things people might not know is when the work was first completed and performed in 1893, it was performed with a chamber orchestra of solo violin, low strings, harp, timpani, and organ, sort of close to what Rudder's orchestration edition for the Fauré Requiem is. What also might surprise you is that it was only written in 5 movements. The movements for baritone solo, the offertorium, and the baritone and chorus, Libera Me, were not added until 1889 when it premiered in its completed form with additional instrumental parts for horn and trumpet. So pretty much this work was worthless until he wrote the baritone parts.
Says the baritone.
Says the baritone. But now the piece has been scored for soprano, baritone soloist, mixed chorus, 2 flutes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 4 horns, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, harp, timpani, organ, and strings. And I would say that the full orchestration is not my preferred style of performing. I very much prefer the chamber and the intimacy of it. But for one of the recordings that I enjoy listening to, it's a full orchestra, and it's generally because it's a full chorus. But I would say this piece, for me, it paints death as beautiful. It's not a dirge, it's not a slow death, but it really paints a picture of hope. In 1902, Fauré wrote to a friend that he saw death as a joyful deliverance and aspiration towards a happiness beyond the grace rather than as a painful experience. And I would certainly say that he translated that sort of feeling into the Fauré Requiem. There are moments of such tranquility, but just the beautiful French styles of choral writing is just outside of English choral writing. I don't know that I find as much beauty and serenity in other forms of choral writing as I do with French. And it's kind of, once you master the French language, then it just becomes beautiful. I mean, I can only think of how many choirs we probably have been in that have butchered the Cantique de Jean Racine and things like that. But I wanted to ask you, Maestro, what is, when you're preparing either chamber chorus or a symphonic chorus to do the Fauré Requiem, what are the things that you find that you work on the most in preparing a piece like this?
I think what I always try to find is there's always one movement or one section that the choir is going to have a lot of success at immediately that is sort of, in my mind, the sound of this piece. And so, with the Fauré Requiem, I probably would go to the Agnus Dei. Has a wonderful tenor opening, but I try to find that one piece that kind of encapsulates the whole, sort of the germ of the whole piece, and how can you take that and now apply that. But I think with Fauré, especially in that piece, it's all about the colors of the vocal sound, and the tenors have all these exposed, beautiful entrances. The sopranos at the end of the In Paradisum it has to be just crystalline in its performance. So I think for that, I would kind of look at really the sense of that choral sound. And if you're doing like the Verdi Requiem, and it's interesting, we have these two side by side, they're the complete opposites of each other, which is what's great about sometimes how composers set it. If I were doing Verdi Requiem, A, I'd be concerned about the double choir sanctus, but B, it would be really worried more about the technical aspects, because it's a much more difficult piece from a technical standpoint. But I agree with you. I've not done the full orchestra version, but I've done the chamber version probably a half a dozen times, and I think it speaks to that piece because it is an intimate piece.
Yeah. So what do you have for number 8?
Number 8, we're going to keep with the Requiem thing, and I know it sounds very depressing. We're only talking about, but again, I think the Requiem text is one of those texts that has so much variety in it, and it's amazing how different composers set it differently. So mine is the Britain War Requiem, which is another huge behemoth piece. And here again, I have another Robert Shaw connection, because I remember watching him rehearse and prepare and present this with the Minnesota Orchestra and Chorale a number of years, just maybe a year or two before he passed. And I think of all the people don't always think about Shaw and the War Requiem, but I think of all the conductors I've seen performance of. He has a unique way about this piece, and the piece is immense in so many ways. It was commissioned for the consecration of the new Coventry Cathedral in England. And the 14th century cathedral was bombed out during World War II. And as people probably know, what they did is they left the walls of this darkened 14th century edifice, and then they put this new new cathedral behind it in a modern sort of frame. And so they left the remains to remind us that of war's destructiveness. And it combines texts from not just the Requiem Mass, the first two we talked about are just the Requiem Mass for the most part, but this one combines the poetry of Wilfred Owen, who was a soldier and a victim of World War I. And the title page has these words from Owen, which really summarizes the message of this piece. And he says, "My subject is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity. All a poet can do is warn." And so it really has that. And when I think of this piece, what's amazing to me is he has 3 separate forces that he does to create this storytelling. He has the full chorus with a giant orchestra and the soprano soloist who's always there. And that force is the big force, and they only sing in Latin. Then he has another group of forces, which are the tenor and baritone soloists. And in this case, the tenor and baritone soloists are soldiers from opposing sides in the war. So they often are talking back and forth, and they're singing Owen's poetry. And then that's accompanied by a chamber orchestra. And the chamber orchestra, as you know, is just a handful of strings, percussion, a couple winds, but the amount of color that Britain gets out of that is amazing. And then the third is the children's chorus, and they're generally placed separately from everyone else. And they only sing in Latin, and they always sing with the organ accompaniment, and it gives this kind of chilling sense of innocence about it. So you have these three forces, and the way he uses them together is quite masterful. And I just want to give one example, and this is going to be long because I love this work so much. But it's during the offertorium. And what happens in the offertorium is it opens with the boys' choir singing just beautifully with the organ. Then the full chorus comes in. They sing a choral fugue, and for the viewers, a choral fugue is really essentially a subject that's passed on from instrument to instrument, voice to voice part. And they're doing the text of God's promise to Abraham and his seed. And then in the next section is Owen's retelling of the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. And at that climatic moment, in that moment where the patriarch refuses to substitute a ram for a sacrifice, but instead slays his son, then Owen adds these words, and he says from the soloist, "in half the seed of Europe, one by one," and they keep repeating, "in half the seed of Europe, one by one," and they keep going back and forth and back and forth and these are again different sides of the war. And then while that's happening, the children come in again. And they start singing while this is going back, this volley, and it's just a chilling juxtaposition. And then if that wasn't enough to really set the scene, now this parable has been turned upside down because Abraham slayed the son. And so Britain returns to that choral subject, that fugue that he did before. But this time, because the parable's been turned upside down, he does it inside out. So the whole theme is now completely upside down. At the beginning, it went from a soft dynamic to a loud dynamic. Now it goes from loud to soft. But it's just this incredible thought that goes into the storytelling of incredible depth and using these different forces to create almost a world that is not of this world. And I think it's just, he uses so much symbolism in the work and the craftsmanship. And you say, wow, could you pick a heavier piece? Probably not. But it is amazing, and I think when you have time to sit down and really take in a piece of art, here again, art sometimes comes from a broken world, and here it does, and it paints such an amazing kind of piece. So I tell you, it should have been number 3.
We studied this in grad school, the War Requiem, and I've always been amazed with the complexities of the piece, and it's an extremely complex piece. It's just never been one of those pieces that has musically called out to me. But it's one of those pieces that I would say during this pandemic, and I'll talk about that in another piece, do not listen to this in your car.
That's very good advice. Yeah, that's not
Find a place in your home or somewhere and just live in the moment of this fairly long and large piece. There's a lot to grasp from it. So I think now we're going to go to questions from the audience.
We're getting a lot of questions about other requiems that
have been left
off the list. People have mentioned the Brahms Requiem and Mozart, and you just got one for the Durfley Requiem.
Oh, those are all on my list. Were they on your list?
They're all on my list. I mean, the Durfley Requiem, I think, is an organist's dream.
It is.
And if you find the right organ, the colors that you can create in that is amazing. Of course, you can't. I have to say, I know that the Brahms Requiem is a masterpiece, and of course, it has some wonderful baritone lines, but is not one of my favorite pieces. But the Mozart Requiem, you want to talk about some really, excuse my French, some sexy fugue subjects. The Mozart Requiem has some just really nice fugue subjects, and the most important moment for me as a conductor was conducting that. and getting to the Salve part.
Yeah.
That to me is just that makes me cry every single time.
I'm with you on that. I know the Brahms I've conducted that a number of times, and the Mozart I would do it every year if I could. What was the other one? The Durflay. The Durflay we're actually going to do. That's in our list for the next maybe year or two. That's on the list again because it's one of my favorite pieces, and I know we've talked about inviting Craig Williams from West Point to come because he's such a great organist, and like you said, it's an organist dream. So the audience, you're doing a great job. I love your choices. We were so bummed we got done. We go, how did we not get Mozart Requiem in there? But we didn't. So we're going to move on to number 7. Number 7. What did you choose, Jamal?
For number 7, I chose, which is not a surprise.
Not a surprise, no.
Mendelssohn's Elijah. And just a backstory for me, I took voice lessons in college and grad school. I was never a vocal performance major, but when I was an undergrad, I studied with one of Jerome Hines' students. When I was in graduate school, I studied with one of the leading evangelists for Bach's Passions and many of the recordings with John Elliott Gardner. And now I'm studying with one of the best, Ken Cox, one of the best basso profundos around. So I've always just had some really amazing vocal teachers. But Mendelssohn's Elijah has always spoken to me because, one, he treats the biblical text with such care. He obviously throws in other things, but really treats it with care. And Mendelssohn's Lutheran faith is often, discussed as to how devout of a Lutheran was he. But the way he sets the text to music, you feel the emotion, you feel the physicality of what it must have felt like for Elijah to convince these Jews to move away from these pagan gods and come back to the one true God, and to the point where he's just ready to give up his life. He's tired. He's given everything physically he has. I honestly believe in the choral orchestral rep, you will barely find any piece suited for baritone like this. And it takes a special baritone to sing this. In 1838, Mendelssohn began this work with Pastor Scrubink, and they had many disagreements about the libretto. So Mendelssohn put it aside, and it was not until 7 years later, after conducting a performance of St. Paul, that Mendelssohn was asked to write a new oratorio. And one of the reasons I love Mendelssohn so much is because if it was not for him, I don't think that we would be influenced by Bach as much as we have been.
Absolutely.
Especially with him resurrecting the Passions. Mendelssohn really did a great job of resurfacing and rekindling the fire for the music of Bach. One of the other really the things I love about this is, unlike a lot of oratorios, Mendelssohn really lets the scripture speaks for itself. He doesn't have to manipulate it so much. He really understands the literary device of scripture and all the things that are in there. So he keeps close to it. And as I mentioned, Mendelssohn really runs the gamut of dynamic contrast, of colors in the orchestra, of colors in the chorus, and really can move you from utter fury to utter frustration and to complete utter sadness and despair. And that's one of the reasons why I love Elijah, because you really are going on an emotional roller coaster from start to finish. And the more and more I practiced this role, I found myself in the choir room so many times in tears, because I realized America has in itself been following after racism and hatred and bigotry and all of these things, and we just need someone, and that's why I love the power of music. We just need someone to return us back to the idea of loving everyone and treating people with respect and really becoming one race. And it's hard to put into words what that piece really means to me. But, a buddy of mine said to me, he's like, it's very rare that you find anyone other than Bryn Terfel that can bring validity and goodness to Elijah. And I hope in my performance I was able to do that.
I think you did. It's interesting with conductors. With any masterpiece, if you just spend a little bit of time with it, you'll learn to love it. And I have to say, Mendelssohn's Elijah was just never a piece that really spoke to me. And then you walked in one day and did an audition, and you did the Refiner's Fire.
Is not his word like a fire.
Not his word like a fire. And I said to myself, I guess I'm doing Elijah this year. Because when Elijah walks in the room, you do Elijah, and you just embody that role. And what's interesting is it didn't take me very long to start getting into this piece that it became one of my favorites, because the depth and the richness of the storytelling and the drama in it is just amazing. And you were amazing in that as well. But I felt like because of your faith, your faith was ever present in that role, and I think that's what made that performance, or at least one of the major things that made that performance so memorable, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, it definitely is it definitely played a lot in how I came to the role of Elijah, and even just reading the story of Elijah and Kings, I would say that my favorite part is, and I think anyone would say that, is the Baal scene.
Absolutely.
I mean, the fire and damnation that is happening, and just these. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just this really focused brilliancy of the brass that just really hits home for me in that. So what is your number 6?
So number 6, we're getting down to the really important ones now. So I chose the Vespers of 1610 by Monteverdi, and that is, anything that's 400 years later is still considered monumental. That's pretty impressive. And I think what I love about it is it's all these different colors and musical styles and different kinds of combinations of instruments and voices. Sometimes it's 3 tenors and an ensemble. Sometimes it's a full chorus and brass. But there's so much variety. It's a very long piece, but it is just an experience. It's a kind of a roller coaster ride of styles. And I remember I've done this a bunch, the opening. I've never done the whole work, which is, it worries me a little bit because it's such a hard piece to bring off. But what I love about it is that opening, which I've done a bunch of times, and it's just the chorus singing this D major chord, just big block chords, while the brass are doing these incredible florid writing above it, and it is, you cannot listen to that and not feel the goosebumps, and it's just such a great piece. And that's from the very outset, and then it just keeps rolling. And I think what's great about Monteverdi and this piece is there's not one Monteverdi Vespers. There's so much variety in it. Monteverdi, was at St. Mark's, and so you think St. Mark's in Venice. It's the idea of using all these different places in the worship space to create different timbres and colors and all this polychoral stuff. And so it's just, to me, that what I love about that piece is there's just so much variety in it, and I think it's one of those pieces that every performance you hear, be it on recording or live, everyone is different. So I think that's my number 6. That's my number 6. What do you have for number 5?
So for number 5, I guarantee that of all the people who will be listening to this, maybe 0.5% of you have either heard of this work or listened to this work. But it is the Glagolitic Mass by Janacek. And just how I was introduced to this piece was by chance. I was in New York, and I was at Carnegie Hall for the first time ever in my life. And I too have always been an admirer of Robert Shaw and Atlanta Symphony and Atlanta Symphony Chorus, just because of his rehearsal technique, so often so many conductors are working on phrasing and trying to be musical and miss the fact that in order to get there, you got to pay attention to the notes and the rhythm that are on the page.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the things that I just really have always loved about Shaw. But obviously when I saw this, Shaw was no longer with us. But I was at Carnegie Hall for the first time, and it was Atlanta Symphony and Atlanta Symphony Chorus performing this Janacek Mass. And just from the very opening, this triumphal opening to the very end, which ends in this super triumphal way, I was just hooked. And I just was like, holy crap, who is this guy? I've got to find more of his work. But Janacek, unlike Mendelssohn and Mozart, who were geniuses at a very young age, were getting work at a very young age, Janacek was not popular until he was in his early 60s. So, first thing is first. What makes this piece call out to me is the insanity but awesomeness of the organ solo. I cannot think of another symphonic choral work of this magnitude that has a deliberate organ solo. Like, the organ is one of the last things you hear of the piece. It's not the chorus, it's the organ and the orchestra. And so it's just, I think of just, he must have felt like a rock star just riding this ripping organ solo towards the very end of this work.
And it is powerful. I mean, it is just like fireworks. It's just amazing.
And the unfortunate thing was it was at Carnegie Hall, and Carnegie Hall has one of the worst organs in the world. It's very disappointing, but every good organist finds a way of just drawing great sound out of any instrument. What's amazing to me is this is a very difficult work, not only to perform, but just to rehearse. You are focusing so much on text because it is in Slavic. And so what's amazing is the fact that he's written this in under a month, is the genius of this guy. Now, this piece follows all 5 traditional parts of the Latin Mass, but it's all in Slavic. And instead of the chorus opening up with a Kyrie, there's this just huge triumphal orchestra, almost like a first movement of a major symphony, and it ends that way. I would also say to, if Chorale ever decides to take this on as a project,
I have to find a Slav.
You have to find a Slav and, someone who really is going to, help with addiction and things like that. It's very difficult. But whoever the soprano and tenor soloist are better have their chops. I mean, it is not easy, and you are singing in the stratospheres forever.
I stopped counting high Bs. I just went, stop counting them. There's going to be a million of them.
I mean, I can give you 2 high Bs in a week. That's about.
We don't
my
know which
limit.
day.
No, and usually it's after the morning coffee and before the evening cocktail. But just to give you some details of this orchestration, it is scored for 4 flutes, and the third flute is doubling with piccolo. It has mostly triple winds and 2 offstage clarinets.
Who does 2 offstage clarinets?
Who does? And who other than Poulenc would say, I'm going to put in 2 harps in this piece.
Exactly.
But Janacek puts in 2 harps, celeste, and organ. And this is one of those pieces where it is not, if you don't have the budget to do it, don't do it, because you need the organ. It's not something that you can just get by without. And as I said, I first heard this work in Carnegie Hall just by circumstances, and have yet to see or hear since then of this piece being performed again. It is not widely performed, but it is, I believe, one of the most important and influential works of not just 20th century music history, but of the choral orchestral repertoire.
When you think about how many times the Latin Mass has been set to a vernacular language, almost never. Brahms was one of the first to do it, but it's one of the most important. He was Moravian, so it's one of the most important pieces. And I think he described that I see the soprano as an angel maiden. I see the tenor as the priest, and I see the chorus as the Slavic people. And so it has this nationalistic sense to it. And seems like the Shaw episode, but it was one of the pieces that he really championed. And it really wasn't until the 1960s that people outside of the Czech Republic knew this piece. So it's a powerful piece. It was a good choice. I had to revisit it. I hadn't heard it in a long time. So it's a great piece. We're going to see if we have a few more questions, comments. What do we have?
Yes, we actually heard from one Janacek fan who said,
"Oh, a Janacek.
So glad you added the Janacek. I was fortunate to hear it in Sydney, where my friend Neil McEwen prepared the chorus."
Oh. Nice.
And switching gears a little bit, a few people have asked about Morten Lauridsen and why he's not on the list.
Oh, I love Morten Lauridsen. I had my short list. I had the Lux Aeterna. I guess probably the reason that Morten doesn't get in this list is it's the most influential choral orchestral, and Lauridsen is one of the greatest choral composers we've ever had. But he doesn't do a lot with orchestra. The piece, not Onata Lux, the Lux Aeterna. I've done that a number of times, and it is such a great piece. The colors and my only thought about Lauridsen is I'm like, please, Morten, write us more stuff with orchestra, because it's such a great piece. Yeah.
If you ever want to talk about Lauridsen with someone, talk with Craig Williams. Lauridsen was his music theory teacher when he was in undergrad.
Oh, wow.
In Southern California. So he's got some really great stories of just learning from Lauridsen. Any other questions or comments we can answer?
I've got a lot of praise for your Elijah performance.
Oh,
he was. To mention that, and people were asking to hear about your feelings about performing it, which I know you spoke about, but I just wanted to mention that to you.
Well, thank you.
It's a great performance.
There was one other comment. Somebody mentioned another piece by Mendelssohn, "There Shall a Star Come Out of Jacob."
Yes, that is smallish cantata. It is. I did not put it on this list because, like Handel's Messiah, it's one of those pieces that you hear more bad church choirs performing than very good performances of it. And There Shall a Star is definitely one of those great church anthems that people
Certainly
love
is.
to hear during Christmas and Advent. But I would also add to that is Mendelssohn's Hear My Prayer, which is, if you have not heard that piece, please look up that piece. It is truly dynamic. So, Joe, what do you have for number 4? We're winding down here.
We are. I don't know if we're winding down or winding up. But number 4, easy choice, the B minor Mass of Bach.
Oh, yes.
You know, we knew it was going to happen. We just didn't know where it was going to happen. But number 4, and it was Bach's last major work that he did before he died. It's immense in its scale and its grandeur, but yet he didn't really give this piece a name because we don't really know what his intention was. He compiled this, and it's music from even the 1730s to the last years of his life, and so it's really kind of a compendium of all of his styles, different compositional techniques. But he didn't give it a name. He never heard it performed live. It was 110 years later when the first time the B minor Mass was performed as a B minor Mass. So it's an amazing piece. It's a synthesis of all of Bach's incredible. It's like people often compare that with the art of fugue, where it's almost like he's saying, here's the treatise for the next generations to come. And I think it's one of those pieces that I want to conduct, and I've never had the opportunity. And so and I think it's such an immense piece. It's definitely on my bucket list, and I think of all the pieces that have probably influenced composers, there's maybe no other piece or no other composer that has probably influenced more people than Bach.
No, I love the B minor Mass. In fact, the B minor Mass was the very first choral piece of Bach's that I had ever heard, and
it doesn't disappoint. There's so many moments. I mean, to me, the sighing strings of the Crucifixus always gets me going. From the Crucifixus to the Et Resurrexit is one of the most triumphant moments. The Sanctus, I can never hear enough with those trumpets.
The Crucifixus, I first heard performed live with my grandmother. And it was in a Lutheran church, and my grandmother and me could talk about Bach for just hours on end, and talk about all the different music that we liked by Bach, but it was the Crucifixus of the B minor Mass that I listened to on the plane ride home when I was going to say goodbye to my grandmother. So wow. It really shares a very sentimental moment for me. But just like you said, that Resurrexit, just the stark contrast between the piece, the concept of death, but of this great triumphal resurrection. It's just genius.
It is, and there's so many pieces like that where, music has a way of connecting with our emotions in a way that, you can't hear this particular piece about thinking about a special moment. And that's what I think was great about these masterpieces. They speak to us, but in so many different ways. So now your next one is in the wrong place. You have number 3, but I don't know how it made it this high. So tell me how number 3 got this far up the food chain.
So the Stabat Mater has always been one of my favorite texts, and just to think about the loss of a child, Mary's perspective of losing Jesus is just it's amazing, and speaks to us as people in grieving loss, speaks to mothers who are losing children. I know it speaks to me in terms of my relationship with my grandmother, and the fact that of 5 children, she has had to lay to rest 2 of them before she died. So I've always liked the text of Stabat Mater. So I knew that there would have to be a Stabat Mater that was number 3 on this list. But it's a medieval poem likened to the Stations of the Cross, and many composers have made have set this. When I listen to this piece, I don't think 1950. I really don't.
No.
But it was composed in the 1950s, and not only was his largest work to date, in fact, it was his first and largest sacred choral work with full orchestra. One of the things that you mentioned to me about this piece was Poulenc's regard for Shaw's interpretation, and how he said Shaw's renditions correspond to the very action of the blood through my body. I thought that was a really good quote you gave me. The nature of this piece is, as you said, is very balladic. But if you listen to movements 1, 6, and 12, they all have this recurring motif, and it sort of fashions a song cycle. One thing I love about this piece is the fact that it is somewhat bipolar. It really keeps going back and forth between the serene and the boisterous. And he wrote this piece for a friend of his who was an artist, and he had considered writing a requiem, but he visited the shrine of the Black Virgin in France and decided that he was going to set the medieval Stabat Mater text. One of the things that is important to me is the reason why I love the Stabat Mater is, you know, like any other piece, everyone has set certain texts to music, but the Stabat Mater, just none of them really sound the same. I mean, you go from this early Palestrina setting, which I think is probably one of the most famous settings, but then you go to Rossini, which gives you this really Italianate, operatic, bel canto sort of feel.
I love the Verdi is one of my favorites.
The Verdi is tremendous, and so there's just this gamut of Stabat Maters, and I really have not found too many that are similar. They really transcend their age. As I said with another piece, if this is your first time listening to the Stabat Mater, don't do it in the car. You might get into several accidents from the bipolarness of this piece. Not only will the soft pulsing eighth notes grab you right at the beginning of the introduction, but it comes in with this beautiful yet very haunting opening lines by the basses, and it's just so amazing of a piece. And so I know in a traditional top 10 list probably wouldn't put this at number 3, but I feel like in a Jamal Sarakoki, Joe Calkins list, this made it.
It's interesting too because it's a fairly short work. It's 12 individual movements. Some of the movements are 1 minute and 30 seconds. The longest one is just over 4. So it really does. It really does have this. It's a very interesting juxtaposition sometimes of the music with the text, but I think it's very contemplative and it's just colorful, and I think it's going to have to end up in a concert near us.
I agree.
Really, it's powerful piece.
So please tell me your number 2 is something that will really get us going.
All right, number 2. You could call it 2A and 2B. It's the Bach Passion of St. John. If you want to go 2B, it could be St. Matthew Passion. Either one of those could fit in that spot, but I didn't want to give up 2 spots, so they can share it. But the St. Matthew and the St. John Passion are, it's an incredible story that is told so powerfully through Bach. And when you think about the language he had, compared to Poulenc, who had all these incredible elevenths and ninths and these extended harmonies and all these different instruments. Bach does with a very limited amount of resources, creates this spellbinding portrayal of the Passion. And this one also is sentimental to me. The first time I connected that, it was under the tutelage of Helmut Rilling at the Oregon Bach Festival. And Helmut Rilling is one of the leading Bach conductors of our day, and became an incredible mentor for me. And so to be learning this piece with someone who has done it a million times and kind of being led on this path was great. And I got the opportunity to see Helmut Rilling prepare the St. John Passion, the St. Matthew Passion, and B minor Mass twice. And I could have gone to college for 20 years and never have gotten what I got out of those moments, and to be with him and to watch him. And one of the things I think that I love about Helmut Rilling, and I put Helmut Rilling's recording on this list, was he has an incredible way of thinking about the pacing and bringing out the dramatic arc of this piece. And either Passion has these dramatic moments, but the scenes of the crowd and going back and forth and some of these meditative, contemplative moments, there's just so much going. But when I watch or listen to a performance of Helmut, he has a way of just keeping it so alive and relevant, and it feels like it's music being composed right there. And I think sometimes, a stale performance can feel like you're in a museum, but a vibrant performance makes you feel like you're right there where it's happening.
One of the things that I like about the St. John Passion is that he really sets it up that even by these minor and major triads, you know who the characters are.
Exactly.
And that's just his use of text painting is so cool. But really, with applying these sort of motifs to specific characters, you just continue to see the dialogue between Pilate and Jesus and the crowd. I love not just the music of it, but just the totality of the piece, and how it really is a musical conversation that's happening with everyone in the stage, and you kind of are just drawn into it. You feel like the fly on the wall at the interrogation of Jesus. And that's one of the reasons why I love the St. John Passion so much, is it just really, I think, tells the story of the Passion story so much better than even in Scripture. The Gospel of John tells it. It's so much more detail and drama than any of the other Gospels.
I know, even at the very beginning, that opening chorus, it's like you hear that opening chorus and it does draw you in, and somehow Bach is telling you, you know what, this is going to be an epic story, and you need to be at the edge of your seat to be ready there. And it's such a powerful piece. And there again, you can put your St. Matthew in, your St. John, but those pieces, I think, it's a completely different form of storytelling. And to do that at the time of Bach is just amazing. And they thought he was an old fuddy-duddy because he was using these old forms. But it's just a masterful piece. And it's like there's so much symbolism in Bach, and you can go and study. It's like I'm sitting at the foot of a masterpiece, and every time you look, you see 20 things that you didn't notice before, and it's just amazing. So that's my number 2. So now it's time for the very number 1 most influential choral orchestral work, and you are going to shock the world with a controversial pick. Let's call it.
Well, before we give away the surprise, are there any questions and comments from the audience?
You're just trying to deflect from getting to number 1.
I really am.
Well, I feel like I'm beating you over the head with everything that was left off the list, but people are asking about Haydn and why there's nothing from Haydn on.
Because Jamal picked bad pieces. That's the problem. I had Haydn Creation, I had the Lord Nelson Mass, and you just, that's the problem. We're trying to be egalitarian.
Well, the Haydn Creation was an experience especially in those last few weeks of working with you and during the orchestra times, helping the choir to, get solidified and ready for the performances. But I have to say, and I don't mean to be rude to the Haydn lovers out there, Haydn is, outside of the Lord Nelson Mass, Haydn is one of those composers that I sit in a chair and listen to, and then I get up the same way I left, the same way I came to it. And the only thing about Haydn's creation that moves me is just the color palette within the orchestration. But the choral stuff itself is just kind of, all right, take it or leave it. And I generally leave it.
All I can say is, Jamal, you're dead to me. Haydn, my favorite composer. What else do you have?
Let's see. Oh, one more composer. No, did we talk about Morton?
We did talk about Morton.
Okay. There was a comment about Berlioz's Requiem.
Oh.
Do you want to handle that one? Because
wow.
I don't have much niceties to say.
I don't know. That's a tough one. I will say that if you want to talk about epic, it is full on epic. And it's one of those pieces I haven't studied as much as I probably ought to, because it's so expensive that I know if I mentioned it to my board, they would. It's kind of like I want to do War Requiem, and like no. They said come back and do Haydn. That's what they said.
Oh man, well, see that there you go. I don't know what to say to the board, but Haydn is not the answer.
Well, there you go. Well, tell us what your number one is. All right.
So
here it comes.
Number one, everyone's just going to be like, "What the heck is wrong with you?" Which is exactly what Joe said to me. Number one is "The Light of Life" by Elgar.
Say again.
"The Light of Life" by Elgar.
Yeah. I know it now better than I did. I have to say, before Jamal starts, he said that, and I thought you were kidding me. I really did. I know a lot of Elgar, and I love Elgar. I didn't even know that piece existed.
Yes.
And I'm like, what is it? I didn't even know this piece. And I went yesterday. I spent some time listening to it, and it's pretty awesome. But I didn't know it at all.
It is one of those pieces that if Key Chorale got their hands on it in a season, they would be in absolute heaven. It is such a great piece. This piece premiered in 1896. However, he spent 3 years after that making some revisions to the piece. And while he was making simultaneously to making the revisions, he was beginning to work on what would be considered his greatest choral piece, if not his greatest piece, which was The Dream of Gerontius, which is one of my least favorite pieces.
Yeah.
And he would write a trilogy, basically, of oratorios. He only wrote 3, and they were all based on New Testament scripture and primarily focused on the gospel. The other 2 oratorios he wrote were The Kingdom, which it's a nice listen, as well as The Apostles. In regard to his oratorio work, his story of oratorio to me is very similar to that of Beethoven. Elgar's oratorios, while making great use of the biblical qualities and the biblical texts, still had such a great amount of humanistic quality. Beethoven only wrote 1 oratorio, which is one you should look up, called Christ on the Mount of Olives. And he portrays Christ on the Mount of Olives in a very humanistic form. And with both composers, you will see the parallels and musical similarities between their first choral works and their greatest choral works. With Beethoven, when you listen to Christ on the Mount of Olives, when you listen to the choral fantasy, you begin hearing all of this harmonic structure, all of this rhythmic structure in preparation for Beethoven 9. And the same thing with Elgar, with all of these revisions, you see some of the motifs from Dream of Gerontius actually in his revision of Light of Life. The Light of Life is based on the story from the Gospel of John where Christ gives sight to the blind man. And the reason why I love this piece is because if you really read the story and then go and listen to this, it's everything you would want if Jesus were to come to you now and give you sight. Like, it's just, it's everything you would want in a piece. I would say what makes me fall in love with this piece is his ability to marry the Wagnerian orchestration styles and the traditional English choral writing. He does it so well, and does it within all of his, does it within Dream of Gerontius. He knows how to marry these two very different styles of writing into one masterpiece. So you have the lushness of the strings, this really brilliant and triumphal brass writing, and for me, you are not a good composer until you really know how to write for brass. Brass is where it is. But his ability to use so much dynamic contrast between the whole piece, and he really paces it out throughout the whole piece. And that's what I really, really like. But the best part of this piece, unlike Beethoven, is his ability to actually write for a chorus and not kill you. Exactly. And, you are able to walk away from rehearsal with your voice still intact. But from a choral conducting standpoint, I think that this piece is important to the repertoire because, one, I think it helps a symphonic choral conductor really shape the sound, and not just the sound for this piece, but the longevity of sound for the chorus. The first thing that this opens with is a men's chorus. And I mean, there are some rather sexy harmonies going on in this opening. But it really teaches the men how to work on blending. I think of all parts of the chorus, really working on blending in the men's section is always the hardest. But it also teaches them how to have this sustained and legato singing ability, and also have this tall and rich tone. So to me, everything that a symphonic chorus would want to teach, and as far as from working with an orchestra, I think that a symphonic choral conductor would really gain some great orchestral conducting abilities from being able to weave in and out of the brilliancy and the big bombastic sounds, but also being able to come back and conduct these really just romantic, lush, and beautiful motifs. And really, as a conductor looking at this piece, you see the need for having so much conducting technique in your bag ready to go, because you aren't. Not that you did this when you conducted Haydn, but traditionally in my, Haydn is kind of like, as long as I can keep a metronome, you're good. I'm just joking. It takes a lot to conduct Haydn, but
you're still digging me.
But I appreciate the it's not a super complex piece. It really isn't. But it's a piece that would really transcend the audience, and for the chorus and even for the orchestra would just give them just an opportunity to play. I feel like with so much Bach and with so much Haydn, so much of the work with the orchestra is articulation, and style, and then you get to interpretation, then you get to being able to put yourself into it. But I feel like with this, just a solid orchestra could really just bring their own interpretation to this piece and walk away with something magical.
I think you're right. The interpretation is what you lead with, and there are so many moments where you just sit there, it sounds terrible, you just wallow in this lush sound. There's so many great moments. So it's an interesting choice, but I think what's great about anything like this, like a top 10 list, is if we did the top 10 next week, it'd be a different top 10. If we did it a month from now, because we're always learning, we're always picking up new pieces. So hopefully in today's episode, you've found maybe a piece or two that you don't know that you want to explore. And as a reminder, you can click the link in the description below the video on YouTube. You can look in the comments section and download a PDF of the entire pandemic playlist with our recommendations for recordings, as well as the Lifetime Achievement Awards and even our 6 off the beaten path selections. And you can click the links to get to know these pieces you don't know, and even enjoy, even more so, those ones that you do love.
And if you want to, you can also take the Pandemic Playlist Quiz and amaze your friends and neighbors with your mad music history skills, and even impress your maestro with how much homework you've done during this pandemic time. And please keep up with Key Chorale News by signing up for our mailing list.
And next time on Morning Coffee
and Maestros,
we'll be discussing season planning during a pandemic. We'll talk about the challenges facing the performing arts as we come to the start of this new season, what that may look like, and how arts organizations can adapt and find ways to deliver their mission even in uncertain times. And it's one of those things that I know has been a lot on our minds as we've been in this weird limbo time of how do we create that mission, how do we create that season that's going to be transformative to our people, and how do we do that? And there's a lot of challenges, but that's going to be the next episode. And I think all I can say about this episode is, what about Haydn? What is you talking about?
I mean, I feel like Haydn is, I
just don't know how you can be so wrong.
As a conductor, I feel like Haydn I can just walk away from, and the rest of the people on stage can just play it by themselves.
And then his friend Mozart, he didn't even make the grade. We couldn't squeeze in Mozart Requiem. Maybe you should have finished it.
I know, but I mean, I feel like now our listeners are going to walk away with so much, their horizons have been opened in a new way to experience different music, and they're going to come back and say, you know what, I don't think I ever have to listen to Haydn again.
Oh, I don't think that's going to be the case.